understand something. We live in New York. New York has gone through more austerity budgets than I have hair on the top of my head. All right, and
he has no hair in his top.
Well, he knows that, and it goes back to Gerald Ford with the big headline in the Daily News that says Ford to New York, drop dead. Okay, he wasn't going to bail out New York, and I lost my job.
Yep. That is a great example of right now what we're going to see in the next few years. And like I said, man, look, the people who voted for Trump, if you're a business owner, maybe your taxes won't be as stringent. Maybe you'll get a little bit of a tax break. But the fact that you're going to be paying more for housing, commodities, the fact you're going to be paying more for utilities is going to wipe that tax break out. And if you're astute enough to see that, then you'll see that it's either a loss or just the balance sheets are kind of even. So that it's not going to be this great boon for the middle class or upper middle class. If you're making $100,000 a year, you're still going to be the huge donkey of tax burden. But if you're making, a couple mil or, beyond a couple mil, you're going to do well during this
Naj, I got to tell you, I remember my father worked in the post office, okay? He was a milkman, he worked in the post office, and after he retired, I mean, I don't have to tell you, his pension sucked, okay? He would get an increase of 1% on cost of living, and then they would raise his Medicare deduction by like 3 or 4%. So he said, "So how am I making money?"
Right, man. That's a great point, man. And just to get back to that Obamacare thing again one more time, remember, most of these people who are on Obamacare are subsidized. What does that mean? The money's coming from the government to these insurance companies. So, this big giveaway to them is what we're looking at. They're going to do well during this term. Anybody who's involved in, trading or derivatives or Wall Street is going to do well. If you're involved in real estate, you're going to do well because still things are pretty cheap and, interest rates are pretty low. But if you're just working class American, you got to figure out something.
I would sell my body, but nobody's interested,
Sell to science.
Hey, listen.
With those pills out there, man, you might get one of these. Hey, man, find the right lady, I guess.
When I go to the doctor, I ask him, should I take my clothes off? He says, no, that's all right. He says, keep it on. I
don't blame him.
I don't either. That's like, I remember this joke. This elderly couple go to the doctor, and I think he charges, with their Medicare and everything, he takes the deductible. So let's say it doesn't cost them anything to go to the doctor. So they went to a sex specialist. So, he says, well, I don't understand. You've been coming into my office every week. You have sex. He says, there's nothing wrong. He said, with the two of you. So the old guy says, listen. He says, the average Holiday Inn charges $175 a night. He said, I come here. I tell you I got a little problem. He says, you write it off on Medicare. It doesn't cost me a dime. He says, and we're screwing. He said, he says, I'm coming out ahead.
Hey, there you go. There you go, man.
Now you know Mark's secret.
Anyway.
Yeah, man.
Oh, what can I tell you?
I don't know, man. We live in interesting times, man. That's all you can ask for, right?
And I'll tell you,
see how this goes.
4 years from now, when the next election comes up, and what's his name's going to be running again?
Who?
The old
Trump?
Bernie's running again. He said
Yeah, 78 years old. He's going to run
he
again.
wants to run, and
Come on, man.
he's talking about running again. No, this is on the news today, and also what's the name? This is a big one
He can
now.
talk about whatever he wants to talk about. He's 78. He's not running. He might be a Democrat kingmaker. You know, he might be able to endorse somebody and really give them some push. But,
Who's that other one?
Bernie Scott is gone.
Yeah, who's the other
Bernie
one?
was essentially the Democrats' McCain. He was the guy taking the time when things weren't good. You just had 8 years in office. And you know how we do in America. Typically, the party that gets in 2 terms, the other party takes over.
Usually.
We're already fighting the uphill battle. Right. So the fact that they had Trump as a Republican nominee, they thought he was the guy who could be had. So, of course, Hillary's coronation, they thought it would go down.
Well,
and it looked logically, it looked like it would work. But Hillary was a bad candidate on the stump. She couldn't really rally people. Everything was based on not Trump, which was a hard thing to kind of swallow. And we saw that in the turnout.
You know, the
turnout was lower than 12 and 2008. So,
the one thing I will say about Hillary supporters, my neighbor across the street was a very, very staunch Hillary supporter from day one while I was back in Bernie. And when it was all over, he was cursing Bernie because he said the millennials didn't come around like they were supposed to. And he had another excuse, and the FBI and Comey.
It's not the people's job to come out for you. You are not, the vote is not yours. You have to earn it.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
She couldn't earn it. That's on her.
Well, that's what I'm saying, Naj. The fact that he was coming up with all these excuses instead of just looking at the situation objectively and saying she blew it. You know, just like in 2008, everybody said she was going to win, and Obama was like the tortoise and the hare. He was the hare, and he was doing his thing, and he was gaining support, and she was still resting on her laurels because she figured, I'm Bill Clinton's wife. I was a former first lady. This is coming to me.
I deserve it.
You know, well, that's what she thought.
It's mine.
You know, and the bottom line is she pulled the same shit now. She couldn't come up with a plan that really got people excited. You know, one thing you got to say, and I'll say it, as a non-Trump supporter, when he got up there and gave his speeches, you know, he could have asked his base to walk off a cliff, and they would have done it. You know, he was like another Jim Jones. Drink my Kool-Aid, okay, and you're gonna wind up in heaven or whatever it is. And they would have done it, you know.
Right. While on the other side, Michelle Obama or Barack Obama had to warm up the crowd, and people were more receptive to when they were speaking than when Hillary got on stage, because she's not a great politician as far as being able to rally people or convey a message well. She knows policy well, and I think she would have been a better president than Trump. If I voted for the 2 parties, I would have voted for her, but I don't fuck with the 2 parties, so throw that out.
I know.
But she's a bad politician is what it comes down to. She lost to the black guy and a reality star. That's her record.
Yeah.
That's her record.
Yep. You know, so, I mean,
that's what it is. That's what it is.
You know, like you say, the people were more excited to listen to the president and Michelle Obama than they were to listen to her message because she had no message.
Her message was Trump sucks. It doesn't work.
Yeah. She was really bad on the stump, man. I'm trying to think of, can you guys think of one, like, really good little phrase or one good line she had? Like, it's hard to really think of it because she's just not a good speaker, what it comes down to. And honestly, I think strategically, it would have been smarter to go with Elizabeth Warren and say, we're really going after women. We're really saying this is about women, and we're going to be open and upfront about it.
Well,
instead, she pulls Tim Kaine out of the mothballs, who's a horrible
candidate
and a horrible person.
You see, you know, if you listen to Elizabeth Warren speak, and you listen to 72-year-old or 74-year-old Bernie Sanders, they turned on an audience the way Donald Trump turned on an audience. Okay?
Yeah.
And then if you listen to Hillary, who readily admitted that she's not the speaker that Barack Obama is, and she's not the speaker that her husband is. Well, then what does that say for you? You're starting out making excuses for yourself before you even get the campaign off the ground.
Now, I wonder if Elizabeth Warren will be strong enough to draw the party to the left and have her a candidate in 2020.
I think
it's a possibility. She's really good on the microphone, so it's a possibility. The only problem is she said all this stuff about Wall Street over all these years.
I know.
And the donors are not going to be open to Elizabeth Warren. It's probably why she didn't want to take her on. So I seriously doubt she would get far. She'd kind of probably go through that Bernie process to where they weed her out after a while. Because no matter what, you have to be acceptable to the big money donors in your party. And I seriously doubt they'll get behind Elizabeth Warren.
Just remember these 5 words, especially over the next 4 years with Trump. The office changes the candidate, okay? Once you get in, things are not the way you perceive them or thought they would go. Now, I will say...
Barack Obama's memoirs are going to be the greatest example of that ever seen. When he tells you about how he was going to hope and change and do all this other stuff, and then he gets there and finds out the political apparatus doesn't work that way. It's really difficult to move, really difficult to change things.
You're
going to have to come to a consensus that you don't like.
He was very idealistic about wanting to close Gitmo. The problem was...
Where we're going to torture the people if not in Gitmo.
Where do you send the people?
Exactly.
All right? Other countries didn't want him. The United States didn't want him. Okay?
And can you bring them on American soil without charges? Like, once you start bringing them on American soil, you start talking about, the real judicial process and, habeas corpus and all of that. So, sounded good on the stump, but once he got in office, I don't know about that one, buddy.
Well, I don't know if you remember, but quite a while ago, it's got to be within the last... year and a half, because ever since Trump entered the race, I had spoken before about this movie called The Candidate with Robert Redford. It just so happens, if you check your TV guides, it's on sometime tonight in the early morning hours about, he's a young, charismatic guy, and he's approached by a bunch of businessmen that say, why don't you run for the Senate, And he's running against Don Porter. I'll never forget, Don Porter is the old senator. Well, the bottom line is he gets elected. And as he's getting up there to get ready to make his acceptance speech, he pulls his campaign manager, who's the equivalent of Kellyanne Conway, into a room and says, what do I do now? He said, I actually won. And his campaign manager says, it was only my job to get you elected. You're on your own now.
Well, I'll tell you, here's my prediction. In 4 years, the only definite thing is going to be, actually 2 different things. One, you're going to be 4 years older. And my other prediction is we'll be saying the same things and nothing's going to change.
Well, one thing Trump did say, he said, if I do everything that I want to do, he said, if I do everything I want to do in 4 years, I'm not running again. He said, I'll be a one-term president.
As I said,
that was a promise.
Many promises have been made, especially like that. You know how many senators and congressmen tell you, well, I'm not a politician. I'm just going to Washington to change it. 30 years later, that same person will tell you about how term limits are unconstitutional and how they're making changes.
No, you're wrong. You know why? You're wrong, because now they say after 30, well, it would be 30 or 36 years in the Senate or Congress. Now when they're ready